Hello BookTube and welcome to day 5 of Vlogmas. Today I'm coming to you with my November 2016 wrap-up. So let's start off with all of my stats. Now the first thing I want to mention is I was doing the challenge of, read 26 books in the year, one with a different letter for each author and one with a different letter for each book title, but the alphabetical thing, I kind of got rid of that. I don't like hunting out books to fill a challenge, and I was getting down to the nitty-gritty, so I just kind of deleted that. My challenge is I can do what I want. So according to Goodreads, I am 2 books ahead of schedule for the year, which is very exciting. For my 2016 How Many Pages challenge, hold on to your hats, guys, I have read 26,629 pages out of 25,000 pages, so I am currently at 106%. Pretty cool, eh? For the Jelly Belly Jelly Bean Challenge, I still haven't finished any flavors. And for the Listopia Challenge, I'm still on level 124 to 25. I am going to have to hunt for a book for that last one, because I don't think I'm going to come up with one anytime soon. I should have just picked the first level. Instead, I decided to try and do all 3. But yeah, the New Year's coming, so maybe I'll see if I can fit any in there. I really hate doing that. And that's part of the reason I don't do challenges, is that it bugs me to do that. To have to hunt out books to fit into challenge categories. So, stats for November. I read 7 books in total, 3 3-star books, 3 4-star books, and 1 5-star book. I read 4 nonfiction, so I finished all my books for nonfiction November, which is fantastic. I read 1 mystery thriller, 1 romance, and 1 historical romance. And I read 5 books that were published between 2011 and 2016, and I read 2 books published between 2001 and 2010. 6 ebooks and 1 audiobook. My pages read for the month was 2,428. That I averaged about 80 pages a day. So there we go. All right, as per usual, I will go from my least favorite book to my favorite book of the month. So we are going to start out with a book called Chop Suey. And sorry, I've kind of got 2 things on the go here. So Chop Suey, A Cultural History of Chinese Food in the United States by Andrew Ko. This was a 3-star book and my least favorite book of the month. So there's the cover. This was one of my book picks for nonfiction November. It was essentially, as it says, on the history of Chinese food, and the beginning of it was really interesting. When they went back to China, when the Americans first started going there, and, them coming over here and bringing it and stuff, but it got really tedious. I found it said a lot of stuff, the same thing twice, like you kept repeating the same things over and over again. And to be honest, I have not a weak stomach, but listening, especially around food, but listening about some of the food that was eaten, I'm the kind of person who, I don't do fancy restaurants, I don't like them. Give me a grilled cheese and french fries any day and I'm happy. I am not a fancy food person. And when they're talking about some of the food that was eaten, I'm also mostly vegetarian. So a lot of the animal stuff that they were eating, this book, I just didn't like it. I mean, if it's the kind of thing that would appeal to you, then definitely check it out. It just wasn't something for me. Let's put it that way. The next book is A Storm of Witchcraft, The Salem Trials and the American Experience by Emerson W. Baker. This was also a 3-star read. This was my audiobook of the month. And this was another book for nonfiction November. I liked this one a bit more than I liked Chop Suey. So there's the cover. This book was very, very textbook. Very textbook. It was really interesting though. There were a lot of interesting parts in it. How they really went into depth with some of the accused, along with some of those who accused, along with the judges, and what was going on that time in Boston and in that area of New England. That kind of led up to the witchcraft craze that happened. It also talks about some of the witchcraft burnings and trials that went on in Maine and Connecticut and, those surrounding areas as well. Be prepared. Like I said, it is textbook. I found a lot of the times when I was listening to it in the car on the way to work that I would just drift off. It was like listening to a professor give a speech. That's how the narrator sounded too, and I mean, it was no fault of the narrator, it was the book itself, so I still found it very interesting, and that's why I gave it 3 stars, but I don't know if this is for everybody. There are a lot of other books written about the Salem witch trials, and it's a subject that I find very, very fascinating, which is probably why I stuck with it. But there are other ones that I'm probably going to try and read maybe next year for Nonfiction November. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This was another book for Nonfiction November. I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed it, but I am very, very glad that Christine, she's another booktuber. I will actually link her channel in the down bar below. She mentioned this when I did my TBR for November, that she read this as well and she really enjoyed it, but it wasn't what she thought it was going to be. Because, like me, I also thought it was going to be more about, like, the murderer. But it wasn't. It was so much more about the World's Fair. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with this book, pretty much what it's about is, it's nonfiction, so it's a true story. It does read like fiction, which is very, very interesting. That part of it I really enjoyed. But it's about the World's Fair in Chicago at the late 1800s and the America's first serial killer and how they kind of coincide. The fair stuff, it was interesting, but it got really, really tedious. But when they switched over to talking about H.H. Holmes, the serial killer, it became very interesting. So that's why, again, I couldn't give it a complete, like, 2-star review. Like, I didn't like it at all. I did enjoy that part of it, but the rest of it I found was really tedious, and I'm really, really glad she kind of warned me about that going in, or else I would have been really surprised. But I still recommend it if you guys, you know, are interested in that kind of thing. The writing is fabulous, and I think I'm going to look for more on that this author has written. I know he's written several nonfiction novels, so I do want to try him out again. I just think that what it was billed to be and what it actually was were 2 different things, and that's a little bit of a disappointment. The next book I want to talk about is Sacred Evil, book number 3 in the Crew of Hunters series by Heather Graham. This one I gave 4 stars to. I did enjoy it. I didn't love it. It hasn't been my favorite in the series so far. I mean, I'm only 3 in. This was the story of Whitney, and she is one of the characters that you meet in the very first book. She's the audiovisual expert, and pretty much the story is the first one to come out of New Orleans and takes place in New York City. And essentially they are finding a killer who is modeling himself after Jack the Ripper. And to be honest, I kind of thought I had it figured out, and then they threw me for a loop, and I was like, oh, wait, it's probably not. And then, you know, come back to it, and, you know, it did keep me guessing. It was a really, really great story. The romance between her and the police officer, whose name I cannot remember for the life of me now, I want to say Jude, was really, really sweet. It was very quick. Not insta-lovey per se, but still, from characters that went to him not even liking her or liking what she's doing there to falling into bed with her, yeah, that's... I always have a hard time with that when it happens rather quickly. But take that out of it. The actual story itself was really, really good, and I did thoroughly enjoy it. The next book I want to talk about is Her Naughty Holiday by Tiffany Reese. It is a Men at Work book number 2, and it is a Harlequin Blaze novel. I gave this book 4 stars. This is the story of Clover and Eric, and it takes place in the same area as book number 1 did. So these are more companion novels than an actual series. You don't have to have read the first one to read this one. The characters from the very first book are mentioned in passing. Eric ends up having a conversation with Chris, the hero from the first book, and that's all it is. It's just a couple little paragraphs, and then you don't discuss them anymore, or again in that book. And I kind of really like that you know, they have their own separate individual books. So with Clover she is the baby of the family. She has an older brother and an older sister, and her parents were both professors, and she dropped out of college and opened up her own greenery, growing flowers and stuff like that. Nursery, that's the word I'm looking for. And so she's doing really, really well for herself, but her parents still harp on her. She's not married, she has no kids, she didn't finish college. So she hires Eric, and Eric is the father of her assistant, Ruthie, or Ruthless, as they call her. She's hysterical. And they've known each other for about a year, so there's no insta love in this. Like, they flirted and they know each other, but this was their first, getting together kind of thing. And it was a lot of adult situations in this novel, a lot of swearing in this novel. The 17-year-old Ruthie was one of the worst. But I think it's true to how a lot of teenagers act right now. I mean, not that she was being rude, but she was just the way she was talking. This is who her character was. And I didn't like this one as much as the first one, but I still really, really enjoyed it. And I'm going to be reading book number 3 in this series in December this month. So I'm looking forward to that one. But yeah, if you guys like these kind of novels, definitely check this out. I think you'll enjoy it. Next up is The Ballot of Emma O'Toole by Elizabeth Lane. This is a Harlequin historical novel, and still, if I had to pick my favorite cover of the month, this would definitely be it. I know this image isn't doing it justice, but definitely go on Goodreads and look it up. This is a stunning cover. But anyway, this is the story of Emma and Logan, and he kills her sweetheart in a gambling match, and is court-ordered to marry her. Of course, as is what happens in romance novels. But that is not the whole story. Going in, it's not just them learning to deal with each other. There is so much more to this story. I gave it 4 stars. I absolutely loved it. There was, he inherited a silver mine, because this takes place in Park City, Utah, in the 1800s, and he inherits this mine, and it's about some of the working conditions for the miners, along with being blackmailed, and him dealing, of course, with the murder of Billy John, I think her boyfriend's name was. There's a lot going on in this story, and it was still so good. I finished it in 2 days. I couldn't put it down. I highly recommend it. Elizabeth Lane is an absolutely fabulous author, and I plan on definitely checking out more books by her. And now on to my favorite book of the month, and this one was kind of a surprise, at least it was to me. I was looking really forward to reading it when I first heard or saw in the Amazon coming soon that it was coming out, and immediately pre-ordered it. And I'm so glad I got to read it for nonfiction November, and that was Bellevue, 3 Centuries of Medicine and Mayhem at America's Most Storied Hospital by David Oshinsky. 5 stars. I loved this book. Now, this book is definitely for a niche audience. If you're into medical history at all, check this book out. And it was so interesting to dispel a lot of the misconceptions I had about Bellevue Hospital. When I was telling people that I was reading this book, a lot of them were like, oh, the mental institution. No, it's not just a mental institution. It is a public hospital in New York City, the first in North America, or in the US, I believe. It literally traces the history right from the opening of its doors as a poorhouse to help people, sometimes with medical conditions, to what it is now. And up to the point where they talked about its dealings with Hurricane Sandy a couple years ago that slammed into New York City. But along with the history of the hospital comes the history of medicine. And I can't tell you the number of times I went, what? As I'm reading this. Like, this stuff happened, but until you really read it, you're like, wow. The fact that the only way really to get rid of a diseased limb way back when was to cut it off. And way back when, they did not have anesthetic. And they talked about how the patient would be lying on the table, and the doctor would literally look at him and say, are you sure? And if he said yes, it was done. If you said no, then you got wheeled back to your room and would probably end up dying of gangrene or something like that in the foreseeable future. But, I mean, stuff like that. Antiseptic wasn't even invented till like 50 years after anesthesia. So, not like they can put the person out so they don't feel any pain during surgery, but the person's probably still going to die because it's germ infested. It blows me away, and it wasn't that long ago, As a person who spent a lot of time in hospitals and is forever grateful to the advances in medical technology, I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And what the hospital has gone through in all that time, like it dealt with the Civil War, like what it did. And because of the Civil War, Bellevue Hospital was the first hospital to invent an ambulance that was driven by a horse and buggy back then, but the first beginnings of what would eventually become like EMS and ambulance service and stuff. You know, it was the forerunner for the AIDS epidemic when it hit in the 80s. You know, like I said, Hurricane Sandy, a lot of other outbreaks that took place in New York City. It's absolutely fascinating. I highly recommend it. Like, really, if you're into history at all, you know, it goes steps outside of Bellevue's walls and really gets into medical history too. So I definitely recommend it. I loved this book. Absolutely loved it. So anyway, guys, that's it for my wrap up. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the down bar below if you are interested in reading any of these books, or if you have read any of these books. And I will see you guys in my next video tomorrow. Take care and happy reading, everybody. Bye.